Welcome back to Secret Weapons, and today we're taking a look at the Neunaber Illumine. Okay, before we jump into this, I think it's important to discuss something. These are my Neunaber Immerses, my 3 Immerse Mark IIs, that have all gotten a lot of use from me over the years. I, at one point or another, have used all 3 of these at the same time on one or more pedal boards. I've been a big fan of Neunaber's reverb algorithms for a long time now, and I think it's important to kind of talk about how much I've liked this stuff for a long time so you understand kind of my context going into this video. I've not only been using the Neunaber reverb for a long time, I've been badgering the company for a MIDI capable reverb pedal for some time now. Part of the reason I was using 2 or more of the Neunaber Immerses at the same time was so that I could be running a plate and the wet version 3 and be able to quickly switch back and forth between them without having to reach down and kind of like reset up all of my sounds and everything. So when I got word that the Illumine was coming out, I was really, really excited. So it's finally here, and let's talk about it. Let's start by talking about kind of the footprint and the kind of like physical feature set on this thing, because there is a lot of really, really great here and a couple of things that are okay. First things first, the size on this is astonishing. Look, it is barely larger than its like little brother, non-MIDI, no screen, no presets, no nothing. And all of a sudden we have this. It's barely larger. It's like the size of the Benson preamp, but it's a full-featured, full MIDI, stereo in and out, MIDI in and through, expression in device with a ton of preset slots and a ton of functionality and customizability in this form factor. And this is true, it's only 100 milliamps. We're talking about a like big box reverb pedal that doesn't require any special power draw. If you're in like the Strymon power world, you don't have to worry about this kind of thing ever. But if you're on like an old school power supply, this will work. This will work just fine in your rig, and that's crazy. Another thing about the physical device here that I think is so high value, one of the things that Neunaber's been doing for a while that I think is really, really cool is on the back, you've got your stereo in and out right here and right here, but your left channel on both of them can be a TRS cable for single cable stereo instead of needing 2 cables. So you can use both ports or a single port. I find that to be incredibly useful. It's something that I have loved and adored about these Neunaber pedals for a long time. And I was really, really excited to see it continued on through here. I don't know why more companies don't do this, but Neunaber, you guys are geniuses for that flexible 2 cable or single cable stereo, and the fact that you don't have to do any internal jumper stuff or internal global configuration stuff to make that happen. It's so nice. So to wrap up talking about the physical footprint and everything we have going on here, let's talk about the interface. You've got 2 knobs, 2 switches, both knobs twist and click. This is how you navigate through your pedal. This is how you change your presets. This is how you change every individual sound. The top one will scroll through parameters you can make adjustments to. The bottom one is how you make those adjustments. I think the idea here is that you set up all of your sounds ahead of time and then kind of recall things via MIDI. And to their credit, the menu system is pretty easy and simple and straightforward. And I find myself able to kind of get where I need to go very quickly, even if I'm like making changes while playing. I will say this is not my favorite interface I have ever interfaced with. I am a big fan, and I have for a long time been a big fan of pedals that kind of give me all of my options, or the vast majority of my options on the face. Even sub-control stuff is like acceptable, like alternate parameters and that kind of thing. But I really like being able to make adjustments to multiple parameters kind of in tandem or very quickly in succession. And it is one of my only real gripes with the Illumine is this menu system is not my favorite thing. It can be a little slow. It can be a little clunky. Like I said, I've gotten actually really quick with it, but I would much prefer a more traditional setup. But I do love the screen. I do love how much how clear the information you get on that screen is and how quickly you can kind of navigate around within it, considering you can only ever see like one parameter at a time. The switches can be used to do things like toggle between your A and B settings for a preset, to bank up and down with presets, and of course to turn the pedal on and off. Very simple, very straightforward. So anyways, all of that out of the way, talking about the physical footprint of this thing and kind of what can be physically done with it, let's talk about how it sounds. Again, we are dealing with an incredibly small device that takes very little power draw and just sounds excellent. There are a ton of algorithms in this thing. I don't think any algorithm in here is wasted. I think that Neunaber has always done and shown to have a very good track record with making reverb algorithms, and everything in here feels like it works really well. And I think they were very smart about what algorithms to include in this thing. You have the original version 1 wet algorithm, as well as the version 3 from the Immerse Mark II, and the plugin for the wet algorithm, which is the kind of super high quality, high res studio version of the wet algorithm that just sounds incredible. It's great too. The studio algorithm is kind of parsed down and streamlined from the full feature set in the VST. You don't have control over things like diffusion in this thing, which would be great if you did, but you still have both a tilt control, a low pass, a high pass, and a high frequency dampener for things like the VST version of the wet plugin in this pedal. But counter to streamlining something like the wet plugin, the wet V3 in this thing not only sounds dead on and incredible to the one in the Immerse, but here you have pre-delay, depth, mix, and tone, and that's it. Over here, you have that full EQ range that you can use to control this. You can change your modulation width and your modulation rate. You have so much control over great sounds on here that you didn't have before. The plate on here is in here with more control. The spring on here is in here with more control. And I think that that's really great. A lot of those great sounds being customized and expanded and being given more granular control over in a way that you can then recall it very quickly. You can name them. You can kind of organize them, back them up to your computer so that you can switch them between devices. There is a lot to do in terms of kind of pre-prep and organization and kind of getting all your tones exactly where you need them to be, as long as you're willing to kind of take the time investment to program everything inside the pedal. But this thing has a lot more for sale than just the wet algorithms expanded out. There are some great new sounds in here that Neunaber has put together that I am really, really impressed with. The vintage digital reverb in this thing is kind of an emulation of an early digital rack reverb. And I gotta say, it's one of my favorite sounds in this thing. It's mellow, it's wide, it's not overly splashy. It sounds amazing with like synthy textures. It's got a very great, big, smooth 80s vibe to it that I really love. Oh, and one of my favorite things about this thing is the fact that a ton of the Reverb Plus algorithms is what I'm going to call them. I'm calling them bonus algorithms because that's just kind of like where my brain goes. It's a reverb algorithm with something else added to it. Things like a delay, like a digital delay or a chorus or octaves or something. And one of the smartest things that I think that Neunaber did when it comes to Reverb Plus something is they're all built on the wet V3 algorithm for those kinds of sounds. You're not kind of accepting some sort of neutered simple hall reverb to save on DSP to be able to like add something else to it. The wet V3 is one of my favorite reverb algorithms of all time. The fact that they used that one as the pairing piece for octaves or delay or chorus is absolutely great. The chorus reverb on this thing sounds incredible because if you've ever played the Neunaber Inspire, you know how good Neunaber is at chorus sounds. So you have like a Neunaber chorus and a Neunaber wet reverb in the same box, and it's only 100 milliamp draw. This thing's really cool. The bloom mode in this thing sounds incredible. It is a great smooth take on pre-delay that I find to be very useful, especially for big, expressive, synthy, glitchy kind of textures, things like the microcosm and delays and that kind of thing, allowing the individual notes to breathe while still kind of heightening them with a bunch of really great reverb. I think we're getting to the end of the stuff I wanted to cover in this part of the video. This has been a really, really fun and interesting reverb to get to grapple with for this video, because it falls into this incredible category of like, is it a perfect device? No. Like I said, I would have loved diffusion on the Wet V3. I would have loved more knobs on the front. But is this one of the most conveniently sized and powered reverbs for the features in it? Is the configuration on the back incredible? Is the quickness and the smoothness of changing algorithms really, really natural feeling? Absolutely. I think that this is a great, great reverb. Like I said, I had been clamoring for a stereo reverb from Neunaber for a long time, and I am stoked that we have one now. So let's go to some sound samples and see what this thing can do. Before we jump into the Illumine sounds, let's talk through our pedal board and the other gear that we're going to be using in this video. I am playing my Fender 52 reissue Telecaster, tuned to D standard, into the Cali 76 compressor from Origin, the Benson Germanium boost and preamp into the Hologram FX Microcosm, the Strymon Volante, and the Walrus Audio ACS1, which is serving as our amplifier. From there, we go to the Illumine and then into my DAW, which is Universal Audio's Luna, running Neve 1073 Unison preamps. This is what that sounds like with the Volante and no reverb. Let's give preset number 1 a listen. This is going to be the Wet plugin, the most up-to-date, the newest version of the Wet algorithm, available as a VST, and a streamlined version of it is here in the Illumine. So we're not going to do a lot of parameter changes as we run through these different presets because, like I said, we're focusing on certain use cases and certain standout algorithms that I just want to like highlight for the purposes of this video. But for this first one, we'll kind of play with some of the parameters to kind of look at what makes something like the Wet plugin sound so good and so versatile. So we started with kind of like a high mix, medium to high, or sorry, I should say medium to high mix and medium to high decay. Let's go ahead and settle it up a little bit and kind of make it a little bit more pulled back, letting that delay line jump through a little bit more. So one of the things that I find very, very valuable on this thing is the different tone controls that you have. You have a tone tilt, and then in your submenu, you have both your low and high dampening, which can kind of really help you darken or brighten up your reverb to the extent that you need it. I find that the Wet plugin is a little bit bright by nature, and so I like tilting it a little more towards that darker side of things. And I think this has also been one of the most long-lasting strengths of the Wet family in the Neunaber reverb strata, which is I have found that Wet V1, V3, and this new version of it do such a good job of staying out of the way. Like even when you really dig in, it kind of there's that initial splash that gives you a lot of character. But I find that this algorithm has always done a really good job of staying out of the way. Like even when you really kind of like push it a lot harder. So let's kind of, we'll brighten it up a little bit, but let's really exaggerate the mix and decay and kind of see how much of our dry guitar tone stays present. I think that the wet V3 is kind of the benchmark for this pedal. You saw it in this video what a huge fan I am of the kind of like history of reverb through Neunaber, my collection of Immerse Mark IIs and all that stuff. Having the wet version 3 in this thing is key and crucial to what I find intensely usable about this reverb. It's one of my favorite algorithms of all time, and it kills in this context because you have more control over an already great reverb. One of the things that I find so impactful about this one is it has all that same kind of airy quality and beautiful movement that the plugin version does, but it has less of that initial splash, which I find to be just such a nice option to kind of take or leave when you're designing a reverb sound in this device. Like in the old Immerse, you basically had access to a tone control, a pre-delay, a mix, and a decay. You have control over your modulation amounts here. you have control over like multiple parameters of EQ. So let's just take that that tilt and kind of min-max that really quick. Even with that tone completely zeroed out, it just creates a really great, subtle, like, bed underneath. It just creates a lot of space that you really want when you're playing. Especially when you don't want the reverb to be part of, like, your instrument, but you want that kind of tone and that space and that sense of openness around your guitar. Like, let's bypass the pedal and hear what a difference that is. Let's drop that tone back to 50 and start playing with the submenu EQ controls. So on the wet version 3, you have high frequency dampening only. Some of the other modes you have low, high, and an additional kind of like high pass filter on it, which can be really helpful. Let's jump back to the studio version of the Immerse so we can play with a few more of those EQ things, and then I swear we'll start moving through the algorithms. So there is the full frequency bandwidth of the studio the studio version of the wet plugin. I think that that's kind of like a nice mellow sweet spot, which tends to be what I like. Okay, let's start running through some algorithms. Okay, we are almost out of the wet algorithms. This is wet V1. No control over the amount of pre-delay, way less diffusion than versions 3 in the studio. And I think that provides its own really kind of cool, unique sound because you don't have diffusion controls on this thing, which is one of my only kind of real criticisms. You can hear a lot of those similar characteristics as the other versions of Wet. This one obviously being probably the most naturally dark of the three of them, having a locked in place pre-delay and the biggest amount of that splash we talked about earlier. That. Like it almost sounds like there's like some spring mixed into it, which is kind of cool. I don't actually know the history of the Wet algorithms. That very well might just be like some spring from the original design. Okay, so now we start getting into some of the weirder stuff. This is Rumble, which is an octave down, kind of like anti-shimmer kind of thing, which I think is really cool, with darker guitar tones, lower parts, and yeah, I think it sounds great, especially when you set it subtle, which is what this is. You can hear that octave down. Let's roll off our high end a little bit on the guitar. I'm such a huge fan of the kind of like crystalline sound on the echoes here. It's a very like pristine, chimey sounding digital delay. One of the things that I think that Neunaber absolutely nailed on some of these kind of like bonus algorithms, I guess I'm calling them, like these ones that are like reverb plus something else, is that they had the good sense to basically make almost all of them the wet version 3 plus another parameter, which the wet version 3 is probably my favorite sound that Neunaber's ever come up with. So it works out really well for me. Up next is another one of our kind of bonus algorithms. This is the wet algorithm plus one of Neunaber's fantastic chorus sounds. If you've ever played the Neunaber Inspires, you know how many good chorus sounds, like classically 80s chorus sounds, the guys over at Neunaber are able to come up with. So you heard this on the intro on the bass 6, and let's give it a listen. So this is my octo-shim, or oct-shim, I guess is how I spelled it, preset. This is not a shimmer preset, or this is not a shimmer algorithm. This is actually the wet V3 with an octave down and an octave up mixable inside of that, which once again, I think I prefer. And we're only doing an octave up here for kind of a subtle shimmer, but you can also mix in an octave down, which we will do in just a second. Actually, I just had an idea. I haven't actually taken a swing at this yet, but let's see if we can do like a full wet with both octaves all the way up and the modulation increased, kind of almost like organ sound. Let's give that a spin really quick. We haven't tested this before. get real weird with it. Let's see if the microcosm makes that interesting. It really creates a lot of melodrama around that, which is cool. Okay, speaking of the microcosm, we're going to get into some interesting modes now that I think benefit really heavily from being paired with some more non-traditional guitar tones. Yeah, here we are. This is vintage digital. It's based on an old rack reverb that I just find to be really mellow and really just kind of gentle and easy to play. So let's hear it with just guitar first, and then we'll introduce some microcosm stuff to see kind of what happens in interesting ways with it. I really love this one. There's kind of a vaguely metallic, artificial sound to it that I think a lot of like vintage digital reverbs had. But there's like a mellowness to it that I find really soothing and easy to play. The nice thing about that really cool, mellow sound to it is it works really well with some really interesting like I said, kind of non-traditional guitar tones. So let's bring in the microcosm with some kind of like very synthy aesthetics to it and see kind of how the vintage digital sound pairs with that. that's definitely one of my favorite sounds in this thing. Normaling back up here for a second, I think that a good plate reverb is invaluable. If you've followed this channel for any amount of time, you've heard me rant and rave about the importance that I place on things like the 70s plate from the Specular Tempest, and that kind of like really, really small rhythm guitar style plate in the Mercury 7. I think that the Neunaber plate is in that echelon of really killer, subtle plates that I find to be very, very useful for kind of more rhythmic guitar playing when you want your delay lines to kind of pop out, that kind of thing. So this is just a nice basic plate reverb. I think there's a lot of value in a plate that you kind of don't realize it's there until you turn it off and you realize how empty things sound. So let's kind of toggle that really quick. A subtle plate is so high value. Okay, getting back into the realm of big ambient reverbs, this Bloom algorithm, this Bloom preset that I put together, I think, again, is one of those things that benefits non-traditional guitar tones really well. We've got high mix, high decay, and a really slow bloom. So here on dry guitar. Kind of hear that slow build in the background. I find that something like the Microcosm's mosaic modes benefit really highly from that kind of slow evolution that happens behind it. We'll go full wet so that we're hearing kind of that kind of very ethereal, soundscapey kind of sound. And just to hear what a difference that is making. that slow swell really does a great job of letting individual notes still stand out even amongst kind of the cacophony of it all. I have nothing to say about this one. This was one of the kind of like presets that came loaded on the pedal. I just think it sounds really nice. It's a great hall algorithm. It's a great haul. So this was a preset that I made around the swell algorithm in this thing, which is kind of best utilized, in my opinion, at full wet, which is what this is. I have the modulation dialed way back. I have a lot of the highs dialed way back. The goal was to create just a really great, very gentle, droning reverb sound, and I think I nailed it with this. Not to be overly cocky or anything, but this is the mellow swell preset that I put together that I really like. Let's kill the reverb. Or sorry, let's kill the delay. It's a good one. And here at the very end is the sustainer reverb, which is basically a algorithm set up to take your input signal and hold on to it as a reverb for kind of a predetermined amount of time.